Story 1. I investigated a fatal fire in the middle of nowhere in the woods. This house was set off so far into the woods it took me forever to get back there on a dirt road. I pull up in front of the house and of course, the whole thing is boarded up. But the house is huge and old. I got creepy feelings just looking at the place. The front door was boarded up with a bit I didn't have, so I had to climb through a window in the back that the family had left open. As soon as I stepped foot in the house, I felt like everything was wrong. I shouldn't be there, I shouldn't walk around, and I sure as hell shouldn't take pictures. It was that feeling like when someone is mad at you and the slightest thing will set them off, so you just kind of sit there in silence hoping they'll forget you exist so you can do your thing. But I was there to do a job, and so I started to do my walkthrough and take photos. This was set fire, and the guy who died had been murdered by his grandson. But I still had to document each area of origin thoroughly and do diagrams and all that, because fatalities are a big deal. The entire time I'm walking through the house, it feels like someone is standing behind me, looking for me to slip up just once. Like when your boss is there the one time and he's just staring at you, waiting on you to fuck up so he can correct you. I finished the first floor and headed down into the basement where the guy had died. It was mid-July and it was hotter than shit on asphalt. But as soon as I got to the basement, it was like somebody turned on the AC. Of course, it was pitch black in the basement because A, it's a basement, and there's not much light down there on a normal day, and B, that's where the bulk of the fire was, so everything was pitch black. I walked through the basement into the bedroom. The fire hadn't reached the bedroom as it had been started at the stairwell, which acted as a decent chimney to prevent fire spread throughout the basement. But it did get hot enough in this room that the outline of the guy's body was in the carpet right next to his dog's body's outline. As soon as I entered that room, every single alarm bell in my mind was screaming, "Get the fuck out, you moronic jackass! Have you not seen a goddamn horror movie? This is where the angry ghost of Gramps murders you with a hatchet." But I had a job to do. So I stayed, took my photos and collected samples, and searched the whole basement for anything to give an idea of why this would happen. I frequently had to leave the basement to go outside to give my brain time to stop freaking the fuck out. And every time I walked back into the house, everything in me was telling me to leave. The whole time I was in the basement, it was like someone was standing in the corner just watching me. And of course, I was working by my tiny-ass flashlight that's useless, so that didn't help much. The last time I left the house, I crawled through the window and noticed that it had gotten cloudy and windy while I was inside. Thinking it was a random Midwestern storm, I walked around the deck and looked out into the yard to find a buck just fucking staring at me. I'd never seen a deer look angry, but it just looked furious. I just kind of shrugged my shoulders and half waved, and it turned and walked away. As soon as it walked away, the wind died and it started to get warm again. The creepiest house I've ever been to and the weirdest shit I've ever experienced. Story 2. We're a Middle Eastern family. My dad left his home country and fled to Saudi Arabia to work there, went back after making some money and got married in his home country, and went back to Saudi with his wife. My mom gave birth to her first son in the early 90s, and then they had another 3 kids in the late 90s, 3 sons and a daughter. I was the youngest. We lived in an Annex, an apartment at the top of the building that takes up around 25% of the roof of the building. The rest of the roof is a large area filled with TV satellites and other junkies. My parents were quite discreet about all the shady things that happened in that apartment until we grew up, and they became more open about it. The apartment had 3 bedrooms, a living room, 2 bathrooms, a very tiny wooden attic, and a small kitchen. Back at the time, there wasn't another building behind ours, so it was just an empty land that led to a middle school. There's no major story here, it's just a bunch of creepy encounters that I and my family have witnessed, and I'll write them down with no order, but I'll start with mine and then with the ones of my siblings and then the ones with parents. I used to sleep in a bunk bed with my older brother being at the top until he asked me to switch with him, and I liked it at first, but then I realized my brother didn't switch with me for no reason. After a while, whenever we go to bed every night around 11 p.m., I keep hearing some noise on the ladder of the bed like someone is climbing it. I never had the guts to look. Sometimes I would feel the presence and pressure of someone sitting on the bed too, but by then I've developed this technique where I would just cover my whole body with the blanket and force myself to sleep. I told my mom and she was like, "There's nothing. Just be a real man and sleep." I would also hear kids laugh in the living room, which is next to our bedroom, but I grew to ignore these voices, and eventually, they stopped bothering me. I remember a few nights when the neighbors would knock on our door at 3 a.m. and they'd ask my parents to not let us ride our bicycles on the roof because it's disturbing them. My parents apologized to them, even though we were all asleep and there was no one on the roof riding their bicycles. I knew there was something wrong with that place when I noticed that our bicycles were in different places on the roof the next morning, and there was no way anyone can go to the roof and play around because the door was locked, and the only person who had the locks was my dad. My siblings knew about this too, but they didn't talk to me about it because I was the youngest and they didn't want to scare me. We moved back to our home country because my dad wanted to start some business over there, and we stayed there for 3 years. That was when my dad decided we should go back to Saudi. It was so hard to find an apartment, and our apartment has already been rented to a couple. But there was an empty apartment on the first floor in the same building, and my dad took it because it was the closest to his workshop. I thought that this time it'll all be normal, but on the contrary, it was way much worse than that annex. After just 1 week, I woke up around 4 a.m. at the sound of Fajr prayer, sunrise prayer, and as soon as I opened my eye, someone was sitting next to me wearing worn-out clothes with broken eyeglasses and bloodstains all over his shirt. He was rubbing his hands on my blanket. I looked at him and he smiled. That was the scariest moment in my whole life. I felt like I'm going to be killed or something. It wasn't sleeping paralysis, because believe me, I know the difference. I lied my head back and I probably passed out till the next morning. When I told my mom, she said it was just a bad dream. Whatever. And no one at my school believed me. It was like a funny thing for them to do, to make me talk about what I've seen, just to laugh about it. The next day I woke up at the same time. This time there was no one on my bed, but I saw a guy wearing weird gothic kind of clothes, and he was next to my sister playing with her hair. I haven't seen anything else after that one, but I always heard people talk in the room, more like hisses and whistles. Sometimes someone would breathe in my ears while I'm asleep, and sometimes they'd take my pillow away. But that was it. They never truly hurt us. I find it fun to talk about it right now. My sister was friends, kind of, with our neighbor's daughter. She was with her in school, and she told me some creepy things about their family, things I haven't given much attention to at the time because I was young, and I think they had something to do with all these shady things. They never close their apartment door. It's always open. Always. My sister also told me that she once saw her friend bathing with her clothes on, and she always smelled so bad. She also told me that the bathroom lock would be unlocked in our apartment sometimes when she was showering. My oldest brother said that he would usually see my mom wandering in the house while he's pretty much sure that's asleep in the bedroom. And when he asked her, she'd say that she was asleep. My other brother said that he once saw 2 shadows dancing on the wall in the living room. My mom opened up about it a few years ago and told me that sometimes she would check on us while we were asleep, and then she'd see us playing in the living room at the same time. She also said that every couple of months she would ask my dad to buy new cups and glasses because they would go missing for no reason. She said she never knew what was going on, and neither did my dad, but they didn't want to acknowledge it to us because they didn't want us to be afraid. My dad couldn't afford to move to another place. She also said that some of my sister's dullness would be scattered around the house sometimes. She told me that she once saw a man with a long beard in the corridor, and that she ran to her bedroom and locked the door till my dad came back from work. She also told me that when she was at the hospital, before giving birth to me, my dad woke up with another woman next to him. He said she kissed him and told him that she loves him. When my dad asked her who is she, she just left the room and he never saw her again. That's everything I can remember right now. We live in different countries now and we rarely meet. But when we do, we talk about it and laugh as if it was a funny thing to talk about. We never knew what was happening, but it was quite an experience. Story 3. I had a friend who cleaned out and sold foreclosed homes for a living. He once took me on a ride to a house he had to photograph for the bank after it had gone into foreclosure. From the moment we got there, it was unsettling. It was in the area of a ski resort, and the neighborhood was wealthy. But once we stepped inside, it was clear that it had been used as a kind of boarding house for resort staff. Numbers outside each of the bedroom doors large closets/weird spaces turned into bedrooms. The place was filthy, with black garbage bags everywhere, pizza boxes and booze bottles, like clearly a party house for staff, but recently abandoned. At one point I was on the ground floor and my friend was in the basement when I suddenly got full-body chills. I was standing in the kitchen and there was a bathroom next to it with the door closed, and I somehow knew that someone was hiding in that bathroom. At the very same instant, my friend called me down to the basement where he had found a back corner that had been converted into another sleeping area. There was a television still on, just showing static, and a kitchen knife on a crate next to the mattress. That was the moment I stepped directly behind my 6'4", 300 lb friend and told him we had to get the fuck out of there. I'm pretty sure the home was being used as an illegal boarding house for undocumented resort workers, and I honestly felt bad for the terrified kid who was still squatting in the basement, but I sure as hell didn't want to find him. Story 4. Forest Haven is an abandoned insane asylum in Maryland. It's posted no trespassing and technically patrolled by guards, but in reality is very easy to get into. I was there 2 weeks ago with my SO, exploring and taking photos. There are 22 buildings on the property, all just wide open and abandoned, covered in collapsed ceiling tiles, broken glass, and graffiti. There is still furniture in some of the rooms, and if you delve deep enough into the property, you can still find patient records that were left behind when they closed. We found a stack of patient files in a dark, windowless room. It was so surreal reading about a severely mentally retarded man with a history of schizophrenia who talks incessantly. This patient had a one-page handwritten summary for every year that he had been in the hospital, and they all started the same. Kenny is an almost 45-year-old white male with severe mental retardation and a history of schizophrenia. He has been at Forest Haven for 5 years. Only the age and duration change from page to page. The first one is dated 1973, and the last page in his file is a printed memorial flyer showing he died in September of 1990. The facility was ordered to close in 1974, but didn't close its doors until 1991. In its last year of operation, there were 9 deaths at the asylum. Kenny was one of them. The creepiest part? The patient whose file I randomly opened up to, in the middle of a stack of wet, moldering files, sitting on the corner of a collapsing desk in an interior room of an abandoned basement. He shared the same first and middle name as my SO. Just a weird, creepy coincidence in a cold, wet, creepy place. Story 5. My fellow constable and I had a lunch break at the same time, and we met up at a little rest area off one of the county line roads. Window to window, typical cop shit, and we're chatting and eating. He tells me he got the new set of spike strips for stopping fleeing vehicles, for those that don't know. And he's like, "Oh, come look, they've got a better egress handle." I pull up a bit so I can get out of his trunk and he shows me, and we're admiring the new kit. I don't know why the hell he noticed this, but for some reason, human tracks were leading into the wooded area off to our right about 5 meters away. Just beyond where the trees start, there's a barbed wire fence, and the area is the provincial property, and it's not accessible to the public. The reason is that there's an old abandoned mining town down about 10 minutes into the woods. We radio about possible trespassers, and we go slogging into the woods. We get there, and this place looks like some shit out of that episode of Looney Tunes where Bugs Bunny and Yosemite Sam are braving the Klondike Gold Rush. Only creepy and, well, empty. Tracks lead toward the mine itself, of course it does. Why wouldn't it? We get to the mine entrance and waltz in like we own the place, and there are all these old chains and shit hanging from the ceiling of the cave, and it smells like ammonia from animal piss. A bunch of old wooded construction stations is strewn everywhere. Creepy. Yeah, well, then we turned the flashlights on, and both of us nearly shat a sea turtle. There were 4 mannequins in Native American garb in a semicircle around a dais with some sort of bovine skull and just a bunch of charred wood and shit laying around. And the mannequins were painted with eyes and such. No people around though. I guarantee goddamn you the screech we heard was from wind passing through a crevice in the cave wall, but we both, again, nearly shat a marine reptile. Decided, fuck this, day shift can deal with this crap. Yeah, anyway, that was the creepiest crap I've ever experienced. Maybe it wasn't even that creepy. Maybe I'm a little bitch. All I know was it startled the piss out of me. Story 6. My worst was on a ghost tour in New Orleans 2 years ago. We went to some fairly non-active, unimpressive places first. Last, almost as an afterthought it seemed, we ended at this museum on Rampart St. It was a voodoo museum that the tour company operated out of. A total tourist trap. There were 4 of us, 2 couples. The tour guide showed us there was a door behind a body bag that was hanging on the wall. She explained behind the door was our last location to investigate for the evening, and we would go in twos as we had done before. My partner and I had gone first to the other big location, so we let the couple with us go into this place first. The tour guide took us into another room and showed us to a room with some chairs and a night vision monitor with our friends on it. They looked to be in a tiny apartment, and we could hear they were above us. After not long at all, maybe 3 minutes, they both came back into the room. Looking shaken, they both said, "We don't know what's going on in there, but no bueno, we had to get out." These were not people who were easily rattled. Curious, my partner and I went next. There were a few flights of stairs that led into a small apartment. There was a main room with a door off of it to the left that led to a small bedroom. To the right was a door leading to a galley kitchen, a narrow hallway, and a bathroom at the end. We walked around in the living room and bedroom. There were some dolls in the bedroom. One was a Chucky doll. Har har har. We heard what may have been a small child giggling at one point. Nothing big and scary. At that point, I was just wondering if they were not a fan of little kid ghosts or Chucky. The second we walked across the threshold into the kitchen, everything changed. It was small and cramped with a dirty stove and an empty, dirty fridge with the doors hanging open. Nothing remarkable, but it was how it felt. The only way I can describe it is I instantly had that feeling in my stomach that you get on roller coasters, but not in a good way. My mouth went dry and there was something else that seemed to be building. I tried to shake it off and walk down the narrow hallway to the bathroom. Again, standard bathtub, sink, mirror, but that feeling wouldn't go away and the second feeling crept up even more until I finally pinpointed it. I felt like there was an incredibly angry, evil, malevolent something that hated me to the core of my being, staring me down from 1/4 of an inch from my face, but it was invisible. This thing hated me like nothing could hate anything on this earth, and it had just met me. And there was not a shred of a doubt in my mind that this thing was inhuman. I don't remember if I told my partner I wanted to leave or if I ran out on my own. I honestly don't remember coming down the stairs back to the museum. I just remember being in a chair hyperventilating, chilled to the bone with fear. The tour guide looked unaffected. I said, "What the fuck is in that kitchen?" almost sobbing. She said kinda blandly, "He doesn't like me much either." And then she told us, this was what's known as the Rampart Street Murder House. A couple who met during Hurricane Katrina lived up there. Their names were Zach and Addie. They were well-known bartenders from the French Quarter. They fought occasionally, but nothing too serious it seemed. One night, out of nowhere, Zach strangled Addie to death and then dismembered her corpse in the bathtub. He cooked her on the stove, then stored the rest of her in the refrigerator, including her head. He wrote a suicide note, then partied for the weekend and capped it off by jumping off the roof of the Omni Hotel. All of the appliances were the original appliances. Story 7. When you're a teenager and first get your driver's license, you like to stay up late with your friends, but there's nothing to do at night for a bunch of 17-year-olds. So you go find fun. There was a place that we all called Shady Town here in NJ. I don't remember what it was officially called, but I remember it was around Montgomery, New Jersey, and I think it has since been demolished. I remember we parked at an elementary school, and just behind it there was this place. It was an entire decrepit ghost town with houses, a school, and a psychiatric hospital all falling apart. We went late at night a few times. We explored some of the abandoned houses in the school the few times we went. It was creepy for sure, but after having been a few times, we felt kind of comfortable around there. Comfortable may be a stretch, but we weren't exactly scared. I remember sitting on a bench outside of the school once, passing a Poland Spring bottle of vodka and orange juice around with my friends, as 17-year-olds do. It's not like we'd go there to hang out. We were there to explore, but it got less creepy. Jim only came a few times, but always seemed almost reckless in the way he moved about the horror movie buildings, like he was doing a walkthrough with a realtor. He'd see a closed door, open it up, and walk right into the middle of the room. If you've ever been exploring abandoned creepy-ass buildings, you'd know that you tend to creep about the kind of slow, peeking around corners and through cracked doors before moving on. Jim just moved around as if he belonged there, which he did everywhere we went. Not with a swagger, just comfort and confidence. On maybe our 8th or 9th visit, Jim found a basement window into the psych hospital. The hospital was always hard to get into. The doors were always locked and the windows boarded up. We were all cool exploring the houses and the school, but the abandoned psych hospital in Shadytown was a little heavy for us. Not for Jim, though. He went right for the window, and when some of us told him not to go in there, he just looked confused and said, "Why?" and went on in. We were all true, so we went in after him, even though we didn't want to. Our flashlights and headlamps showed us to be in reality a typical basement, with pipes running along with the ceiling and concrete floors. It was a big room, but nothing was in it, but there was a door. Of course, Jim walked right over to and went through. The other 4 or 5 of us, it was a while ago, I don't remember, froze up, but Jim hollered, "Come on," so we went. We were in a long hallway with concrete floors and cinder block walls, lit only by our flashlights. At least we were towards the end of the hallway, and we could see the wall at our backs. At this point, I started to get scared. I and another guy said that we didn't want to go down that hallway. Jim said, "What, do you think there are ghosts here?" And I said that there might be. Jim yells down that hallway, "If there are any ghosts here, do not fuck with us." This made me pissed off, and I asked him what the fuck he was trying to do to us. The other guys were scared too, but Jim laughed at us and said that there aren't any ghosts here and started walking down the hallway. We were pissed and scared, but we kept going because who wants to be the first to bitch out when you're 17 and abandoning creepy abandoned psych hospitals with your friends? We went into some rooms that had a bunch of old disgusting linens and mice in them, but then we eventually got into the morgue. It was almost cathartic to reach the morgue, like when the monster in the horror movie finally shows itself and is visible for the rest of the movie. Yeah, I detected that this was an extremely fucked up place to be, that we should not be here, and that if a demon was going to possess me or tear out my throat, it would happen in this room. But at least I didn't have to worry about it anymore. This was the hot spot. We stood still, and even Jim stood still for a second, and we flashed our lights on the old abandoned mortuary refrigerated chambers where the bodies were stored. And here is the reason this story is about Jim. He went right over there and opened one of those doors, pulled out the gurney, and laid down on it. It's worth noting that the gurney itself was gross, regardless of all the implications of death associated with such a thing. He asked for one of us to push him in and close the door. We all said hell no. He started to get kind of pissed off and called us pussies, which caused Ed to go quietly push him in and close the door. We just stood there and waited for what seemed like a long time, but who knows? It was probably 30 seconds. Eventually, we heard a knock, and we all jumped out of our skin. But it was Jim wanting to be let out, so Ed opened the door and pulled the gurney out. We were stunned at what we had just seen. Who in their right mind would do such a thing? Why? We all had the bravado thing going on, but that is one of the scariest things I can even imagine doing. He went over to it like it was his job to go into that refrigerator chamber. When he got out, he just laughed a little bit. He started opening other doors and pulling out the gurneys while we hung back towards the entrance. He looked like he got bored and left the room. Jim started to go back down the hallway to explore again, but we had enough. Fuck you, Jim. We're not going down there. We are fucking leaving. We walked back to the window we crawled in from and helped each other out. Jim followed us like a toddler who was told he can't have candy before dinner. When we started immediately walking back to our cars, we were all quiet. We were freaked out by Jim. And when we got near to the cars, he said, "What's wrong with you guys? Listen, of course, there are spirits and shit. There just weren't any there." And we said, "Fuck you, Jim." Then we probably went to Wawa. Jim is now some kind of lawyer, last I heard.